He held the scissors like a game show prop, gold handles gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "We are not dependent on a single badge," he shouted, slicing mine in half with the kind of smug triumph you usually only see in cult leaders and Silicon Valley layoffs. The room erupted in applause. I didn't. I stood up slowly, grabbed my jacket, and walked out before the confetti cannons went off. Because of course there were confetti cannons. What the cameras didn't know, and what Callum Wexler would learn soon enough, is that he hadn't just cut plastic. He'd triggered the custodian invalidation protocol buried so deep in our infrastructure, it made the NSA look sloppy. 12 years of classified access, burned into the security framework of Varentech, had just been revoked. On video. Before I go on, do me one favor. If you've made it this far and you appreciate this kind of story about cold revenge, silent power, and what happens when the wrong person pulls the wrong thread, tap that like button and subscribe. 97% of people watch but don't subscribe, and honestly, it's what keeps stories like this alive. Now back to what matters. Wexler wasn't the first suit to underestimate me, but he might go down as the most catastrophic. When I joined Varentech 12 years ago, I wasn't hired to manage. I was hired to contain. I built the original clearance systems, encrypted access nodes, and rollback pathways that no one even knew existed unless I personally showed them. My badge wasn't symbolic. It was the root chain, the original custodian token. I didn't want power. I wanted stability. I didn't need recognition. I needed silence, continuity, clean audit logs, and systems that didn't implode when someone forgot to renew a cert. And for over a decade, that's exactly what I delivered. Then he showed up. Callum Wexler, modernization director, fresh from some failed West Coast fintech with a resume full of buzzwords and a superiority complex to match. He walked into every room like he owned the patent to time itself. Called everything before 2020 legacy garbage, started using phrases like tech debt, hero systems, and compliance drag. His vendetta became obvious on day 3. "No one person should be a single point of failure," he barked in the weekly review meeting, looking right at me. I didn't flinch. I was wearing that badge when he was still learning how to spell sysadmin. He launched an initiative called Zero Reliance. It sounded good in the slides, triple redundancy, cross-training, cloud-first thinking. But the second I saw my badge show up in red on the reauthorization list, I knew where this was headed. He wasn't interested in modernization. He wanted a clean slate, one that didn't include me. Document or delegate, they said. But there were parts of the system you couldn't delegate, not because I didn't want to, but because the compliance chain from 2013 burned my biometric ID directly into the firmware of several mission-critical systems. Encryption didn't care about ambition. Code didn't answer to corporate politics. And no one, not even legal, had the clearance to rewrite that without invalidating the entire system architecture. So I watched him plan his theater. The cultural reboot event, the red lanyard, the gold scissors. I even knew he was going to film it. He couldn't resist. Callum was the kind of man who needed an audience to feel real. What he didn't know was that Clause 14C had just been satisfied. He had, by his own hand, invalidated the original custodian. Me, which meant fallback control was now under Norstrand Data Group, a company I'd founded, a company with no visible ties to me, at least not anymore, but one with a single job, to hold mirrored permissions in cold storage, notarized, sealed, and designed to reassert control in the event of custodian compromise, which is exactly what that badge-cutting ceremony constituted. So while the confetti fluttered down and the interns cheered like they'd won a new espresso machine, I walked out with 12 years of control in my back pocket. Calm, silent, already dialing the number that would bring the entire system to a halt. The audit came in like a thunderclap dressed in a PowerPoint. Zero Reliance, he called it. Big black text, minimalist slides, smug grin. The entire presentation was just a glorified coup against anyone who remembered how the place actually ran. His plan? Every system needed to be accessible by 3 people. 3. No exceptions. Like we were running a food truck, not defense-integrated infrastructure layered with classified modules and government-monitored clearance tiers. I got the directive in an email, CC'd with 2 managers I'd trained back when they were interns who thought root access meant gardening. Please begin delegating responsibilities and documenting all legacy workflows. Not even a phone call, just an email. I stared at it for 10 seconds, then flagged it unread like it was radioactive. Because here's the problem. You can't document what was never meant to be printed. You can't delegate encryption that's burned into biometric locks and firmware resident protocols bound to a single identity chain authorized by the federal government in 2013. Wexler didn't care. He wanted me replaced. Not out of spite, not even out of personal grudge. Though I'm sure the way I ignored his Slack messages didn't help. No, Callum Wexler hated that a system could still exist that didn't require his fingerprints to function. He wanted the illusion of control. And I was the last obstacle standing between him and his blank slate utopia. I did what I always do when a bad plan gets airtime. I prepared for the consequences. Quietly. No drama. I went into my private air-gapped drive and began exporting a fresh version of the fallback registry. Clean copy. Time-stamped. I updated the credentials under my Norstrand alias and cross-referenced the old validation chain, still intact, still pointing to me. Then came the memo. Internal, encrypted, labeled confidential, but leaked within 12 hours like everything else. In it, a list of high-sensitivity personnel for retention and exception handling. My name wasn't on it. His signature was. I read it 3 times. Once as myself, once as the systems architect, and once as the founder of Norstrand Data Group. 3 versions of me, none amused. He was playing with fire. Not because he was evil, because he was ignorant. He didn't understand the architecture he was gutting. And when a man with too much confidence and not enough context starts making no exceptions his brand, bad things happen. That night, I stayed late, lights off, just the hum of the backup server and the quiet ticking of my external drive duplicating protocols built over a decade of my life. I pulled the original hard copy of Appendix 9 from the cabinet in my locked drawer. Yes, we still keep real copies for a reason, and flipped to the section most people never noticed. Custodian Invalidation Protocols. Clause 14C sat there, quiet and powerful. Invalidation through badge destruction by authorized leadership was listed as one of only 3 irrevocable custodian compromise scenarios. He hadn't just issued an order. He'd signed a contract he didn't even know existed. I bookmarked it with a post-it and wrote one word on the edge. Trigger. He wanted to test whether Verintech could survive without a single point of trust. He was about to find out what happens when the system agrees with him. They handed out cupcakes. Actual cupcakes. Red frosting, white sprinkles, little sugar badges on top. The whole atrium looked like a corporate birthday party instead of what it was. A ritual execution of institutional memory dressed up as culture. Wexler called it a cultural reboot. He had the stage, the lights, the interns in matching t-shirts, even a theme song. Someone had edited stock music over a highlight reel of before and after system dashboards, as if purging everything that came before him was a software update. He cracked jokes, pointed at graphs, made eye contact like a politician selling bottled air. Then came the centerpiece. My friends, he said, pacing like a TED Talk dropout. Today, we release the past. No more black boxes, no more hero systems, no more unseen gatekeepers. He held up my badge, clipped to a red lanyard, centered under a spotlight, still carrying the same embedded chip that, until 5 seconds ago, tethered it to every access gate, encrypted vault, and compliance-bound subsystem in the company. The badge I never once dropped, never once misused. The one tied to every classified link I personally architected. He grinned like a magician pulling a dove from his sleeve and lifted a pair of gold ceremonial scissors someone in HR thought would be festive. The audience, mostly junior staff too new to know better, cheered as he sliced the badge in half and dropped it in a clear box labeled Retired Credentials. It was theater, but the kind that rewrites history. I didn't clap. I didn't flinch. I stood in the back of the room, one hand in my pocket, the other wrapped around the edge of my coat sleeve, steadying my fingers so I wouldn't curl them into fists. Because I knew something no one else in that room did. Not the interns, not the ops director grinning by the cupcakes, and certainly not Callum Wexler. He had just pulled one of 3 compliance-defined triggers for custodian compromise. Badge destruction by authorized authority. And when that happens, when a designated security custodian is flagged as compromised by physical badge invalidation, the system doesn't check if it was symbolic. It doesn't ask if you meant it metaphorically. It executes protocol, quietly, deeply, irrevocably. The moment those scissors snapped shut, my identity across the entire Virentech infrastructure was auto-flagged as revoked. Every key pair, every certificate, every signature chain anchored to my credentials, burned into firmware from a decade ago, all of it nullified. It was as if I'd died. As far as the system was concerned, the custodian was gone, and with the custodian gone, fallback control transferred, just as the architecture intended. I looked once at the red box with the broken badge. Then I turned and walked out. No goodbyes, no protest. Just left before the applause turned into networking selfies and performative Slack posts. The system had already started recalculating. By the time Wexler finished taking pictures, it had already noticed the missing link. The badge was gone. But the protocol? The protocol was still very much alive. The moment the badge snapped in half, I stepped off the company grid and onto mine. Clause 14C hadn't been some vanity line buried in the architecture. It was the spine of the fallback. A protocol I wrote with a cigarette burning low in a hotel ashtray and a federal compliance officer snoring on the other end of the conference call. I'd seen what happened when companies assumed trust was immortal, when they bet everything on the illusion of permanence. That's why, 12 years ago, I built the backdoor that wasn't a backdoor, a custodian override that only triggered in the event of formal invalidation, exactly like Wexler had just performed. The backup identity wasn't some spare account sitting on a spreadsheet. It was a sealed, notarized keychain stored in a compliance-certified cold vault under Norstrand Data Group, an entity I'd founded in Delaware under a legally separated name. Its only job was to exist in limbo, waiting. Its only condition? My formal invalidation, and that box had just been checked. At 4:26 p.m., I drafted the affidavit. 3 sentences, 1 signature, notarized and uploaded through Norstrand's secure legal channel. Subject: Activation of Custodial Contingency, Section 14C. That was all it took. Within minutes, the first red banner appeared. Custodian revoked, chain incomplete. Then another, then 50. Every internal tool Wexler had his greasy hands on began pinging him like a haunted house. Certificate mismatches, session timeouts, system clock drifts, vault authentication errors. Any environment that had once whispered open at the scent of my badge now stared back at him in hostile silence. Because here's what he didn't know. The fallback wasn't just a backup. It was a mirror with boundaries, and it only accepted reality after the system confirmed compromise, which he had gifted to me, on camera, in front of witnesses, under official authority. I didn't have to convince anyone. I didn't have to log in, argue, plead. There was no meeting, no request queue, just automation, silent and brutal. By 5:03, every attempt to bypass the warning was met with the same response. Invalid trust chain, custodial anchor revoked. He tried escalating, tried forcing resets, called in IT like they were Ghostbusters with root access. Didn't matter, because control wasn't something you could shout your way into. It was written, buried in protocols so deep they'd become part of the company's digital DNA, and now that DNA was rejecting its transplant. Meanwhile, I sat by my window at home, tea cooling in my hand, watching the streetlights blink on one by one. I didn't need to scream. The system was already doing the talking for me. By Monday morning, the building buzz had turned cold. You could feel it in the elevators. Eyes glued to phones, half-finished bagels clutched like lifelines, department heads whispering in broken phrases that all started with, "Have you checked?" and ended in, "Well, shit." The first outage was the dev sandbox. Nothing fatal, just annoying. But by 9:12 a.m., core databases refused to sync. The licensing server rejected every handshake from internal terminals. Encrypted backups hit a silent fail and spun until timeouts triggered alerts in every team chat. Compliance tried pushing through an emergency override on the CRM node. It denied the signature. HR's portal started demanding a deprecated cert that hadn't been used since 2017. Finance got locked out mid-payroll queue. People began filing tickets marked critical, then remarking them urgent, then just walking to IT with coffee and desperation in their eyes. I received 6 emails before noon, all from internal IT. The first was a question, the second, a status request, the third, a calendar invite. The last 3 were increasingly polite versions of, "Are you aware of any undocumented dependencies affecting systems provisioning following last week's clearance reassignment?" I didn't respond. By 2:47 p.m., legal reached out. Short message, just 1 line. "Would you be available for a brief consult regarding custodian protocols?" I didn't answer that either, because none of them were ready to understand the thing they were finally starting to feel. You can't reset what was never designed to be tampered with. You can't override a protocol bound to a revoked custodian chain without breaking the entire security fabric of the infrastructure. And once the system registers that break, it doesn't negotiate. It locks. It waits. It calls the fallback. Only Norstrand responded. Formal reply. No small talk. Just the standard acknowledgement template and a digital receipt confirming that the fallback systems had been activated in accordance with Custodial Chain Clause 14.c, effective as of the timestamp embedded in Wexler's badge cutting performance. The message ended with a line most of them probably had to Google. Control will remain decentralized pending arbitration or formal reassignment via court-recognized custodian rotation. Wexler didn't wait for arbitration. He tried to force a manual override. He actually believed the system would flinch for him. What he got was a black screen with white text, "Violation of custodian integrity chain. Root node authentication mismatch. Reset denied. Arbitration pending." That was the moment, according to someone in IT who would later buy me a drink and whisper it over nachos, that Wexler slammed his palm against the server room glass and yelled, "Why the hell can't we just delete her access?" Because, sweetheart, it wasn't mine anymore. That's what he never grasped. I didn't own it. I built it. And the difference between owning power and engineering its distribution is this. I wasn't in the way. I was the way. And now? Now he was learning what happens when you fire the bridge and expect the river to stay still. By Thursday, the executive wing looked like a crime scene wrapped in khakis and rising cortisol. The door to Wexler's office stayed open, but nobody walked in alone. Compliance officers rotated through like they were changing shifts in a nuclear control room. The head of infrastructure had bags under his eyes and a legal pad with more doodles than answers. HR was sweating bullets, not because someone was crying. This time, no one had the time to cry, but because federal compliance had flagged a possible breach of chain of custody law. That phrase alone is enough to end careers. It started when a forensic audit botched the attempt to force system reauthentication. The logs read like a horror novel in JSON: invalid trust anchor, revoked principal ID, fallback state triggered, chain mismatch, arbitration lock. And the worst line of all? Custodial ID inactive. Override path, Norstrand custodian only. Someone finally looked up from a printout and asked the question none of them wanted to hear the answer to. Who or what is Norstrand? I got the summons that afternoon. Simple request. No threats, just, "Could you join us for a discussion?" Sure, why not? I took my time. Wore the same clothes I always did. No power suit, no war paint. Just jeans, a dark blouse, and boots heavy enough to remind the floor who was walking across it. I walked past reception, didn't bother signing in. The badge was gone, but the building still remembered my steps. They had the boardroom prepped like it was a settlement hearing. 4 execs, 2 from legal, and 1 lone soul from external compliance who looked like he was hoping for a tornado to rip through the windows and save him from the next hour. No one said a word when I entered, not even Wexler, who was pacing near the coffee machine like a trapped Roomba. I sat down, unzipped my bag, pulled out 2 manila folders. The first, a notarized architecture diagram signed and sealed 12 years ago, mapping every mission-critical system back to its root trust source, my badge. The second, a copy of the custodial fallback clause, section 14c, highlighted, initialed, and validated by both internal and federal compliance during original system deployment. I slid them forward across the table like I was dealing a quiet, nuclear hand. No speech, no gloating, just paper. Paper older than most of the people in that room. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind. The kind that changes temperature. I could hear the shift, like gears grinding to catch up with a truth they couldn't unsee. They scanned the diagrams, read the clause, and you could practically clock the moment each of them realized the same thing. This wasn't a glitch, it was a protocol. It wasn't sabotage, it was design. And Wexler? He didn't sit. He stood there, frozen, staring at the fallback clause like it was a ghost with his name on its knuckles. Someone tried to ask a question. I think it was legal. I didn't respond. The paper answered everything. For 12 years, I had held the chain. Now I didn't. Norstrand did. And unless they could convince Norstrand to release the systems or assign a new custodian through formal arbitration, which could take weeks, if not months, they were frozen. Panic doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it arrives in boardrooms that go too quiet. And that silence? That was the sound of every person in that room finally understanding who they had actually fired. The request came in at 8:12 a.m. Friday morning. Encrypted message marked high priority, signed by a VP who hadn't spoken to me in 4 fiscal quarters. The subject line, request for emergency custodian reinstatement. They were asking nicely now. The message included buzzwords like expedite, operational stability, and urgent restoration of pre-existing credential chains. There was even a line that made me laugh out loud. We recognize the complexity of the situation and appreciate your historical contributions. Historical. Like I was an old building they'd bulldozed too fast. I didn't reply, because I couldn't. Not technically, not legally, not anymore. See, reinstating my custodian status wasn't like resetting a password. That system had no oops button. I'd made sure of it. The fallback protocol required a full sequence reset, 10 business days minimum, hard-coded into the arbitration logic to prevent anyone from shortcutting the chain with a handshake and a LinkedIn apology, unless expedited by the Norstrand custodian, which wasn't me. Not anymore. That role, legally and irrevocably, belonged to a trust entity governed by a 3-signature protocol. 2 of those signatures lived in a vault in Delaware. The third required a full internal security review before it could even be activated. I designed it that way on purpose, because systems shouldn't be loyal to people. They should be loyal to principle. And the principle here was clear. If you burn the bridge, you don't get to demand a ferry. They tried anyway. Multiple memos followed. Internal compliance tapped external counsel. Legal pinged Norstrand with urgent arbitration queries. Someone even contacted an old contractor of mine to verify custodial flexibility options. Nothing moved. Instead, what did move, quietly, behind closed doors, was Wexler. By mid-morning, he was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The official phrase, tucked into an internal memo that leaked faster than HR could redact it, was this: unauthorized badge revocation event. It sounded almost innocent, like someone dropped a folder, not like someone publicly invalidated a classified infrastructure custodian and triggered a full system integrity lockout with cupcakes and gold scissors. The same memo outlined a temporary chain of command restructure. Compliance had taken over all infrastructure decisions. Legal was now embedded in daily IT meetings. Engineering had been instructed to cease all code pushes pending custodial stabilization. That's corporate speak for, we don't know what we broke and we're afraid to touch it. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't even relieved. I was precise. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't a comeback. It was gravity, finally acknowledged. Everything they had ignored, overwritten, or modernized had real weight, real rules. And when those rules were broken, the system didn't need me to rage or retaliate. It just did exactly what I taught it to do. Wait, lock, hold. The river didn't flood. It remembered its banks. And now they were the ones drowning in paperwork. The clip was only 18 seconds long. No sound, just clean overhead footage from the atrium's ceiling cam. Wexler standing under the spotlight, arms raised, red lanyard dangling like a trophy. Gold scissors posed like he was cutting a ribbon at a mall opening. And then, snap. Badge severed. Plastic falling like confetti. Interns clapping in the background. That video went from internal highlight reel to Exhibit A in under 3 days. The external compliance firm brought in to review the situation didn't mince words. Their summary was cold, almost surgical. The act constituted formal revocation of a security custodian per compliance chain under the definitions outlined in Federal Protocol 13.6b and Internal Policy 14-C. Translation? Wexler hadn't just made a scene. He'd formally declared a zero-trust reset across every federal tied system that bore my custodial signature. That badge wasn't ceremonial. It was my key. And he cut it. Norstrand's legal team moved next. Their statement was short, but airtight. We recognize the breach. Custodial revocation confirmed. As per protocol, fallback lockdown remains in effect until a new custodian is appointed through validated governance or the prior custodian is reinstated via chain arbitration. The irony was thick. They couldn't appoint a new custodian without going through Norstrand. And Norstrand didn't answer to Verintech. I got the offer that afternoon. Neatly phrased, properly respectful, even included a personal note from the acting CTO. We understand the value of your historic role and would be grateful for your return in a lead capacity. Return? As if I was ever theirs to recall. As if the last 2 weeks hadn't happened in high definition, time-stamped by every system they no longer controlled. I didn't respond immediately. I took a walk, breathed, thought. And then, from Norstrand, I sent a document. 2 pages, clear language, no emotion. Title, Custodial Services Retainer and Licensing Agreement, Infrastructure Chain Access Restoration. In short, I wasn't returning. I was restructuring. They didn't get me back as a badge. They got Norstrand as a service. Flat rate, quarterly review, termination clauses clearly outlined. And from that point on, if they wanted system access, they paid for it. Not just with money, but with acknowledgement. My name wouldn't be on their org chart, but it would be on every audit trail that mattered. I wasn't interested in vindication. I wanted boundaries, permanent ones. This was no longer about proving Wexler wrong. That had already happened. Publicly, irrevocably. This was about ensuring no one ever again confused visibility with control. No one ever again believed that power lived in noise. The badge was gone. But the signature? That stayed. On the contract, on the chain, on every line of code that now refused to answer to anyone but me through Norstrand. 3 weeks later, the building looked the same on the outside, but inside, everything spoke a little softer. No more cultural reboot posters. The cupcakes were gone. So was the bravado. The Atrium TVs now cycled through compliance bulletins instead of motivational reels. I heard someone had quietly removed the scissors display from the glass case in the lobby. Too symbolic, too risky, too stupid. The systems came back online in layers. You could feel it in the logs. Authentication chains resolving, certificates validating, permissions blooming open again. Not because they fixed anything, because they finally followed the path I'd built from day one. The new licenses, issued through Norstrand, cost more than anyone liked, but they worked. And this time, everyone understood who owned what. The acquisition Verintech had been posturing for, the one they'd been dressing up for investors with words like streamlined architecture and modernized operations, was pushed back. 3 quarters, minimum. Not because the buyer pulled out, because the internal audit showed the system couldn't legally change hands without a full review of custodial lineage and fallback governance. In plain English, they couldn't sell what they didn't understand. And Wexler? Gone. No press release, no goodbye email, no cardboard box with a half-dead succulent. Just gone. Last I heard, he was consulting somewhere, which probably meant rebranding his LinkedIn profile and hoping no one Googled his name alongside unauthorized badge revocation. The new director? Quiet. Methodical. I don't know their name, but I know this. Before revoking anyone's badge, they run it through legal. Twice. With signatures. As for me, I don't go in anymore. I don't need to. No badge, no title, no parking spot with my name on it. Just a weekly encrypted call, a retainer agreement, and my signature, still embedded at the root of every system that matters. I work from home, sometimes from a cabin, sometimes from a train. The infrastructure hums because the chain still connects, and I'm the endpoint. They finally learned the difference between visibility and authority, between cutting something in public and actually removing it from the system. He wanted to make a point. He did. He just never saw the shape of it. Because when Callum Wexler cut that badge, he thought he was cutting me out. Turns out he handed me the system.